Hello and good evening to you all, and welcome to Hope and Homes, an initiative of Justin Cohen and Jewish News, together with World Jewish Relief and some other organizations that I'm going to tell you about, where we hope we're going to be able to provide you with information if you want to house a Ukrainian refugee in your home or want to know how else you can support them. Can I just make one or two things clear at the beginning? We are intent this evening on looking at the practical way that we can help Ukrainian refugees rather than discussing the horrors of what's actually happening in Ukraine at the moment. There are many other opportunities to do that, but we want tonight to concentrate on how we can help you to help Ukrainian refugees as they make their way to this country. I'm very pleased, in a moment I'm going to introduce a very good panel, but I'm very pleased first of all to ask Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, the Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of Great Britain and the Commonwealth, to say a few words. And Chief Rabbi, it is public knowledge, you came down with the dreaded bug and you're still recovering from it. And before you say anything, thank you so much for joining us in those circumstances. And I know I speak for everyone watching when I say we all wish you a very, very speedy and full recovery.
Thank you so very much, Henry. Good evening, everybody. And thank you, Henry, for your kind wishes. Baruch Hashem, I am fine. And please God, may everybody be well during these challenging times. For me, it is an enormous privilege to take part in this evening's event. Why do I use the word privilege? Just before Purim, we read the special maftir from the book of Deuteronomy, where we remembered what the Amalekites did to our people. The Torah says, remember that which the Amalekites did unto you while you were on the way when you left Egypt. Many of our commentators want to know, why is it necessary for that word baderech, on the way, to appear? Where else would the Israelites be? They had just left Egypt. They were in search of a safe haven in the promised land. Of course they were baderech, on the way. But one of our greatest commentators, the Al-Shich HaKadosh, explains as follows. That term baderech, on the way, symbolizes so many passages of our Jewish history. Occasions when we were baderech, fleeing from terror, desperately seeking a safe and secure home. And therefore, he says, we as Jews have a responsibility. In the event that we ever come across others who are similarly baderech, we must rush out to strive to do whatever we can to help. And isn't that exactly what is happening right now? According to United Nations figures, there are some 10 million people who have been forced to leave their homes in the Ukraine. Some 10 million people who right now are baderech, on the road, on the way, either within Ukraine or just over its borders. And I have been exceptionally overwhelmed by the response of individuals, of families and communities here in the UK. In our blessings for the Haftarah, we praise God and we say, Ha'omer ve'oseh. He says, and he does. Ha'medaber u'mekayem. He speaks, and he also fulfills his word. God doesn't just say things, he is our creator of action. And that is a rallying call for all of us likewise to be Omer ve'oseh. Not just to be the dreamers, not just to be the speakers, not just to be those who undertake resolutions, but rather ve'oseh, to be people of tachlis. And that is why it's a privilege for me to be part of this event this evening, as Henry has said. The purpose of this evening's event is not to provide information about the horrors in Ukraine. We are aware of the horrific situation that so many millions of people are enduring, the fear and the dread that they're going through every moment of every day. Neither is this evening's event a rallying call to people, please come and do something. We don't need to say that. The reason why all of you are part of this online event is because you want to know how to do something. You've made up your minds that you won't just be dreamers and those who give promises. You will be the people of Tachlis. And that's an extraordinary compliment to the Jewish community of the UK. I personally have been inundated with people wanting to know not if, but how they can help. Together with so many organizations, I want to thank the Jewish News, together with its partners, World Jewish Relief, JRAN, Refugees at Home, and Citizens UK, and so many others who are responsible for staging this evening's event and who are explaining how we can indeed achieve the Tachlis. Thank you so much to all of you for recognizing those people who are Baderech and seeking to be the first to actually provide real and genuine help. So thank you for the privilege given to me this evening to participate in this event. And thank you so much for the privilege that I have to be your Chief Rabbi. God bless you all, but most importantly of all, may God bless the people of the Ukraine. Thank you.
Chief Rabbi, thank you so much for those very, very moving words. I know I speak for everyone when I say again how much we appreciate your giving of your time to be with us this evening and to inspire us in the conversations that we're going to have. You know, this is a really important topic to me. It's important to everyone who's here tonight. My late father arrived in this country on the 4th of August, 1939 as a refugee, designated a racial refugee. Horrible term. And in itself, even being a racial refugee, fleeing from Czechoslovakia as it then was, being a racial refugee would not have got him into the country. He was lucky. He had a work permit that had been sent to him from somebody he knew who'd come over here a couple of years earlier. So I'm descended from a refugee. He was the lucky one in his family. Most of his family did not survive the war. They were murdered in the Shoah. And we know just how important it is now for us, for all of the organizations here with us tonight, to be able to share with you how we can do the tachlis, do the spade work, the groundwork that needs to be done to prepare for the refugees who we hope are going to arrive in this country very soon. And to help us do that, we're joined by representatives of 4 very important organizations. Citizens UK, in the person of Rachel Griffiths tonight, has been involved in the community sponsorship of refugees since the scheme was launched in response to the Syrian refugee crisis in 2016. And through its Sponsor Refugees project, Citizens UK is the largest lead and principal sponsor supporting local groups in every part of this country to resettle a refugee family in their community. And in response to the current Ukrainian crisis, it's developing a Communities for Ukraine campaign, which takes the learning from the existing community sponsorship scheme and equips groups to resettle refugees through the government's new Homes for Ukraine scheme. It's also looking to recruit 20 larger community organizations as strategic partners, able to sponsor 50 refugees at a time as part of a drive to resettle 1,000 refugees by Easter and enhance the training and safeguarding provisions around the scheme. Rachel, before I move on to other panelists, do you want to just say a few introductory words, please?
Thank you very much, Henry. And it is a great privilege, a great honor to be here on behalf of Citizens UK and to hear those inspiring words from the Chief Rabbi. I personally am a great believer in the power of civic society, of you and of me and of ordinary people to come together and to effect great change. And that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight. And that is something that Citizens UK has always believed in its 30 years in existence. And as you mentioned, Henry, I'm specifically here as someone who has done community sponsorship. In 2017, I co-founded a community group with a group of neighbours. We're called Herne Hill Welcomes Refugees. I live in Herne Hill, which is in southeast London. We had heard about this scheme, which Citizens UK had campaigned for, which came into the UK in 2016. And it was a means by which, rather like this evening, people could actually do something. And so we are a group of neighbours. Some of us knew each other before, some of us did not. But over the last 4 years, we have been able to resettle 2 families who are refugees. The first, an Iraqi family who arrived in the UK in December 2018, and more recently, a Syrian family who arrived in November 2021. So we have seen what it takes to mobilise volunteers and to enable families to integrate, go through all the practical work it takes, and to start to find life and hope and a future here in the UK.
Rachel, thank you very much. We're next joined by Daniel Hall on behalf of JRAN, the Joint Refugee Action Network, which, as the name suggests, is a network of organizations, grassroots and charitable ones, working with refugees and asylum seekers in the United Kingdom, supported by One-to-One Children's Fund. It aims to create and develop a community of organizations and individuals within the refugee sector to share knowledge, skills, and connections, and to mobilize, strengthen, and take joint action to bring about positive change in refugee-related policy and service delivery through shared values. Its vision is for all refugees living in this country to receive access to accommodation, support, and services which will lead to integration and personal development. And it does it by building and supporting an engaged network of organizations providing forums and online platforms for knowledge sharing, championing, and sharing innovative solutions and delivery models, and through collaborating in coordinated advocacy initiatives and partnerships. Daniel, a few more words, please, about your organization.
Yeah, thank you so much, Henry. And I just want to echo what Rachel has said previously, how good it is to be here today, and to thank the Chief Rabbi for his words, and really just putting across what we're all feeling at the moment, that we are in a situation where there is a responsibility for all of us to get involved, and there is a huge outpouring of public goodwill, which is fantastic. And we want to use events such as this to really utilize and mobilize that. So I'm here representing Joint Refugee Action Network, and we're about offering a platform for collaboration, for national and for regional collaboration, for capacity building and peer-to-peer exchange, and for closing the gaps and identifying the gaps in support, and for building bridges. So we run events such as this. We'll be hosting an event bringing together organizations from across the sector, just identifying these challenges, but also proactively looking for solutions. And that really is what we want to do. We support the sector. We have quite a large group of organizations who are doing fantastic things, grassroots and charitable organizations. And it's really encouraging to see how many people across the country are saying, how can we be a welcoming nation? Because that's who we really are. How can we support these people who are hopefully, as you say, going to be arriving very soon?
Daniel, thank you very much. Our next panelist is Sarah Nathan of an organization called Refugees at Home. And Refugees at Home is a UK charity which connects those with a spare room in their home with asylum seekers and refugees in urgent need of a safe place to stay. And it does it both to alleviate street homelessness and destitution amongst the most vulnerable refugees and members of our society, and to encourage integration. It began operating in 2016, and when Sarah sent me some information about the number of guests that they have helped and the number of nights that they have provided, she suggested that at the last minute I should check their website for the most up-to-date information. So it's this: since they began operating, they've successfully placed 2,621 guests for a total of 200,642 placement nights, nights that would otherwise have been spent on night buses, park benches, or worse. Sarah, welcome. A few more words about your organization, please.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to talk about hosting because that's what it's all about. I'm not going to exhort you to host. I'm going to tell you what it's like if you do. I've had 28 people staying with me. I thought the 29th might arrive today, an Egyptian, but he didn't. And I've hosted people from 10 or 12 different nationalities. They've stayed with us for anything from one night to 616 nights. But that was because of lockdown and was pretty unusual. And I have to say that the 6 months minimum being suggested by the government scheme without meeting somebody in advance, without knowing them, is quite daunting. And I've had years of experience. I don't know what it's like if you've never hosted before. Especially as we have a fear that the government scheme doesn't offer very much support. There might be some wraparound from local authorities, we're not sure. At Refugees at Home, what we have is home visitors who come and assess our hosts before they do any hosting. We have a core team, we have hubs, newsletters, email addresses. People are very supported. So I've had loads of people from Ghanim who arrived just the day before Christmas Eve in 2016, to Issa, a Bedouin from Kuwait who left about 3 weeks ago. And I think what you need to know really is that it's like coming to stay. You have a guest in your house. They stay a little while, they become part of the household. When they arrive, you do what you do for any guest. You might find some toiletries, you put out towels, maybe some flowers, a warm welcome, a smile, get Google Translate loaded onto your phone, and you're away. When they come, you offer a smile and a cup of tea, and you don't ask questions about their journey or their reason for being here, because that's straight rude. They're not supposed to pay for their accommodation by entertaining you with the stories of what they've gone through. But sometimes people tell you, and sometimes people don't. One of my most recent guests, Madawi, said when I asked him, he'd been with us for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I said, what was it like being hosted? And he said, do you know, I feel safe here. He said, you asked me how I slept last night. You asked me what I'm doing today. And nobody, this was a 20-year-old, nobody has asked me that since I left my mother when I was 15. And you just think, well, why would you not bring this sort of humanity to people who need it? So, and we've mostly hosted Muslims, works really well in a Jewish home, no pork conflicts. We've mostly hosted single men, but families are good too. It's just really important to treat people as you would want to be treated, to set your boundaries, to not be over-engaged, and you too can enjoy a hosting experience and find it as life-enhancing for you and your family as you would hope it is for your guests who have fled awful things and need somewhere warm, safe, dry, welcoming and friendly to stay in.
Sarah, thank you so much for that. The last member of our panel is Maurice Helfgott, who is the chairman of World Jewish Relief. Now, I have the privilege of being the president of World Jewish Relief, which is a hands-off position. Maurice is the one who has the hands-on role, together with a fantastic staff team. And Maurice, I hope I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I just want to say this for those who don't know what World Jewish Relief is. It started life in 1933 as the Central British Fund for the Relief of German Refugees. And from then until the end of the war, it helped some 65,000 refugees come to the United Kingdom from Germany and Central Europe. And most importantly, played a very big part in the organization of the Kindertransport that began after Kristallnacht in 1938. Our wonderful chief executive, Paul Anticoni, coined this phrase, at least I think he did. I always give him credit for it. If anybody else owns it, then please let me know. He said in the 1930s, we helped refugees because they were Jewish. Now we help refugees because we're Jewish. And that's such an important part of the organization's ethos to me, that we look to see the good that we can do outside the Jewish community. Maurice, tell us a little bit more about what World Jewish Relief is doing at the moment, please.
Thank you, Henry, and delighted to be on the panel. That was particularly delightful, Sarah, the way you described the home experience. World Jewish Relief today is a professional organization led by experts in disaster relief, emergency and development. And it's using its experience in 20 countries around the world with our 27 partners on the ground in Ukraine to deliver, to help rescue people, to deliver aid there, to support on the borders, and to do what we're discussing in this meeting, which is to help with the refugees that will come to the UK. In terms of in Ukraine itself, World Jewish Relief has helped 15,000 people escape from places of danger and has set up supply chains, getting food, medicine, and equipment into Ukraine, and not just into Lviv, but beyond to the south and to the east, where it is particularly acutely required. As our Chief Executive, Paul Anticoni, says, it is always the oldest, the most vulnerable, the poorest. They are the ones who find it most difficult to leave and to be refugees. And so the overwhelming majority of the funds, resources, expertise that we're delivering is delivering to help the people still in Ukraine. In terms of the Homes for Ukraine operation here in the UK, we've worked very closely with the government based on our experience with the Syrian refugees. In 2015, World Jewish Relief set up a pilot that helped Syrian refugees get into, learn the language and get work. And that pilot now operates as a major program in 16 locations all around the country, was adapted for the Afghan refugees, and will, we hope, be adapted if and when Ukrainian refugees arrive here at scale. In terms of home, Henry, should I explain specifically about home now? We're going to come back to that.
No, tell us now, and then I'm going to ask you all a question.
So we've had 1,500 people register on the World Jewish Relief website so far, indicating that they would like to be a host and giving our details. As a result of this enormous demand, we have to go through and evaluate it and work it through. So we have just paused the registrations today. We urge anybody not just to register with us and with the other organizations, but of course you must also register on the government website if you haven't already done so. We are working closely with our partners in Ukraine, Moldova, and Poland that there is a sponsorship offer, and we have a number of registrations on our website, about 60 so far, individuals who we intend to try to match. We're going through a process, interviews and questionnaires to match those potential hosts with people who want to come here. We're working closely with local authorities in the areas where people are likely to be resettled, because the local authorities are going to be the ones who are responsible for inspecting the properties and then for providing all the wraparound support that the refugees will need. For 3 weeks now, we've been working with the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies to make sure that across the entire institutions of the Jewish community, the resources, the specialisms, and the coordination that refugees will need is going to be organized and coordinated. And the expertise and experience of World Jewish Relief suggests that the first 10 weeks are absolutely critical for all refugees arriving. And the role we particularly anticipate playing is to continue, as I've said, to develop the specialist training employment program that will be a necessary part of getting the refugees on their feet when they come here.
Maurice, thank you so much for that. I'm going to kick off with a question to all of you, and I'll ask each of you to reply in the order that I introduced you. Do you think that the government scheme is actually designed to make sure that refugees come to this country, or to make it almost impossible for them to do so? Rachel.
I think specifically in the Ukrainian context, Henry, you're asking.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it is making it possible for, in this particular conflict, it relatively easy for Ukrainians to come in, as much as I understand the visa processing process is going to be much quicker. I understand also that some transport is being provided from mainland Europe to get people over here. And so on, and of course, we have this mobilization of the British public to open homes. So compared with other means for refugees to enter this country, I think it looks much simpler and it is a lighter and more agile system. I don't think there's any question about that. I think there are question marks about how much of a visa process people should have to apply for, especially if they already know someone who's here. And I think the system does have fragility within it, not least the fact that people are guaranteed housing for just 6 months. And in our experience with our community sponsorship scheme, a family is given 2 years of solid housing, which they can't be evicted within 2 years. So I think there is a fragility within it. I don't want to sit on the fence, but I think it's both and I think one of the reasons that we need to be talking as we are this evening is to see where we can, not only as volunteers, plug some of those gaps or support some of the fragility, but also in doing so, advocate for a better systemic approach from government, who then enable local authorities to do their work as well.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you. I would echo some of what Rachel's been saying in that the scheme is certainly making it easier for Ukrainian refugees to enter the UK than people from other nationalities and fleeing from other conflicts around the world. That's certainly the case. But there are a huge amount of concerns that we have with regards to the current scheme, not least of all the fact that it's quite relatively slow. So we're speaking with countless organisations who are meeting lots and lots of very vulnerable people who are arriving at train stations and borders, filling in these visa forms, and then having to wait for a very long time for this to be processed. And so it is quite slow. There are obviously issues within it in terms of having to have named families and named hosts. Maurice has just explained a little bit about the work that they're doing, which is fantastic to try and counter that. But when we look at the numbers of people who are coming across, the capacity of the sector to support this is clearly very limited, and it's something that I would hope that the government would have looked at, because obviously it's fantastic that they're putting the scheme in place, but people need to get out very quickly and they need to find a place very quickly, and there are all sorts of things happening on the borders, a lot of human trafficking that is taking place, which isn't being reported a huge amount in the mainstream media. But you have young mums with young kids who perhaps haven't slept for 60 hours as they've fled across Ukraine and managed to pass through the 8-kilometer queues to get over the border. And it only takes one trafficker with a sign at a train station to say, come to this house, here's a place you can stay. And so there are huge safeguarding concerns. And the other, obviously, the other aspect to this that we're talking about this evening is the wraparound and holistic support when people arrive. So it seems at the moment the government have said this is a way that homes can be provided, and here is an element of financial support, which is very important. But Sarah on the panel said this as well. We want to be a nation of hospitality, and that's what's coming across by people's offers of support. And it's not just about a home. It's not just about a place to sleep. It's about that full integration experience and that full support for those who arrive.
Thank you. Sarah, your views on the scheme, the Ukrainian scheme?
Well, I mean, people who are using the Ukrainian scheme are not having to go through the asylum system, which can only be a good thing because the asylum system is completely broken. They're still having to go for visas. But they're not being defined as refugees and they're not having that protection. And I think that's quite concerning. The scheme at the moment is very clunky. You have to know somebody, you have to bid for visas, you have to match yourselves. Only individuals can do it. No charities, no businesses can do anything can be supportive. There's the safeguarding is tricky. There's a lot of Facebook groups where you get reasonably nice looking young women looking for somebody who will match with them on the government scheme where there is no safeguarding as far as we can see at all. There might be after the placements are made. It's a bit late by then. We do hear about quite a lot of trafficking, and I think there could be some coming here. But the main problem, or one of the main problems, is that it's so far quite slow. You can only, so far, I don't think anybody's come in apart from maybe via Ireland who isn't a relative of somebody who's already here. The visas look as if they might take quite a while. One of our hosts, who wasn't doing it as a host, applied for 8 visas. It took her over 12 hours, and she woke up in the middle of the night fearing she might not have printed the right document. You go, all the way back to square one. And we know people here are being hospitable. We've had over 10,000 applications. This is not expressions of interest. This is people telling us, how many bathrooms they've got, and these are their references and all the rest of it. Really serious stuff. So we know that there's an appetite for taking people in. We know that people want to have some form of safeguarding and checks to make sure that there's less trafficking than there looks as there will be. And I'm rather concerned that at the moment, it doesn't look quite as if this scheme matches up. But on the other hand, it's not the asylum system. And that's a very good thing to say about it.
Sarah, thank you. Maurice, your view, please.
So within hours of the war beginning, we wrote to the Home Secretary, as did others, to make clear our view that there should be a humanitarian scheme. That has not happened. It has not yet happened. But I think there are 3 different types of scheme. The first is the family reunification scheme, and that appears to be working reasonably well. There were some teething problems, but it's working well. And we know members of the Jewish community in particular who reached out to us, and with help, we helped get people out of Ukraine and are reunited with their families today. So that has happened. There is then this particular scheme that the other panelists have highlighted some of the real challenges about, and we are in very robust conversation with government, trying to make suggestions about how this scheme can be improved, because there are lots of opportunities to improve it. And then the government was talking about a community scheme. And I think if it pursues a community scheme, that may in fact be much more practical, because as Sarah said, taking somebody on potentially for 6 months is more daunting task than if a community potentially took somebody on and put them up, etc., etc. So I would say that Richard Harrington, who is the Minister of Refugees, who was appointed, is someone that World Jewish Relief has worked with very closely in the past. He was in the government when the refugee crisis happened for the Syrians, and he was part of setting up the specialist training and employment program that I just talked about. And I do believe that he is very genuinely motivated, that he is very keen to improve accessibility and efficiency. But clearly, there is a great deal of progress that still needs to be made.
Maurice, thank you. So thank you all for those answers. A number of questions have come in from people who are watching this evening, and just arising from what you've all just said, I don't know that any of you will know the answer to this. But Nikki wants to know, for those of us who've already offered to sponsor named individuals through the government scheme, might you have any indication of how long the approval process is likely to take? Any answer, any views from any of the panels, please?
We
Sarah.
were told initially that it would be not less than 5 days. I mean, 6 months could be not less than 5 days. It is too early to tell. The scheme only opened last Friday. We are not 5 working days in. It may be that a whole load of visas will come through tomorrow or Friday. And that would be lovely. Or not. I don't know.
Any other panelists able to cast any light on this? No, we're all, Nikki, I'm afraid, in the dark. Practical question, please. If a family takes in a family from Ukraine, what arrangements are likely to be made for schools for any children in that family? Rachel, can you help us at all?
Yes, the children are eligible for school places, and so the local authority will be obliged to provide school places. Whether or not there's any choice around that for the family, I don't know. That obviously will depend on where people live, but absolutely, children will be eligible for school places.
As they would
Any
be
other
if they were in the
panelists have
asylum
any?
scheme.
I'm sorry.
As they would be if they were asylum seekers.
Yes. Okay, and just on children, Avi has asked, what about orphaned children? Do we know of any orphan children who are likely to be able to make it to this country, and what will happen to them? Sarah?
We don't know, and there may be, but actually what won't happen to them, or not under our aegis at any rate, is they won't be hosted. We don't host unaccompanied children. It's a massive safeguarding risk. You need to be trained. If that's what you want to do, then apply to your local authority to be a fosterer or an adoptive parent. But there's no way that unaccompanied children should be placed in a hosting situation. It would be quite wrong.
Again, just on this question of safeguarding, we don't know, do we, whether DBS checks are going to be required for sponsors. But Nikki again asks, is there any advantage to starting that process now while visas are still being processed? Because it might speed things along. Do we know if there's any requirement, Rachel?
My understanding is that following the announcement of the scheme, there was a change and now that DBS checks are required. And we were talking about this at Citizens on a webinar on Monday evening, which where we learnt that it probably at this point is not worth people beginning the process of getting a DBS in place by another organisation, because that might not stand. In as much as, in my local church, I have a DBS certificate there. I work in schools. I have a DBS. You have to have a DBS certificate from the organisation who want you to come and be in contact with a vulnerable person. So the information we've got is wait and see what DBS process you need to go through. Don't waste your own time and some money getting one via another means.
Thank you. Any other panelists have any personal experience of the DBS scheme, Sarah?
Well, I do, but it's not really relevant. The point is, I think that what they're saying at the moment is it's a simple DBS, which actually doesn't usually take very long. But if you've got a child as part of the family moving into the household, it's supposed to be an enhanced DBS, and those can take really quite a long time. I mean, they're not very useful because they just tell you whether you've got a conviction or a caution. They don't tell you about the suitability of the household. They don't tell you about whether everyone's happy with it. They don't tell you if there's going to be exploitation or rent charge or services required. The DBS tells you incredibly little, and enhanced DBS is probably it makes you think you're sorted when actually you're not sorted. So I'm quite worried about it just being a DBS.
Thank you. Now, Rich asks, we're being connected with some Ukrainians who we don't know through a matching platform. What are the risks of proceeding via this method? Or would those risks be mitigated through the government process? The priority has to be helping people. So what do you say about these matching platforms? Daniel, a view, please.
Sure. I mean, I think it's definitely a concern. We talked a little bit about safeguarding just then, and so that will be a part of the process. DBS checks will be a part of the process. In certain cases, enhanced DBS checks will be a part of the process. But there are limits to those, and the other concern there is that they're quite time consuming as well. If you want a DBS check to come through, it can be fairly quick, but in terms of an enhanced DBS check, it's another area where it could slow things down. I think one of the another area where it can be mitigated is, as has been mentioned, is through community support. There are a lot of really good initiatives at the moment of people preparing to rally communities around host families. There are some fantastic charities that are doing this in other areas and other sectors. One such charity that comes to mind is an organization called Home for Good, and they work with children who are being fostered, and they create fostering communities. And so within a community, there'll be one family who says they're going to foster, and then the whole community rallies around to say, we will support you even if we're not able to host. And I think that's a question that came up earlier in the panel. What if I can't host somebody? What can I do? Actually, this has to be a community effort and a community initiative. And so my advice to that person is, don't try and do this on your own. None of us have the full picture. We all have a piece of the puzzle. So if you're in a part of a community group, if you go to a synagogue or a church or any other kind of support network, engage them, speak with your local authorities, speak with your local schools. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and also to ask for help yourself, because as has been touched on, bringing a family into your home is fantastic. Showing hospitality is absolutely fantastic and an inspiring thing to do, but it's something that we have to do together as a community.
Maurice, can you say anything more about the matching process that World Jewish Relief either is or isn't going to go along with?
I mean, I'm not sure I can add a lot, Henry, other than, there is a part of me, and perhaps this has an echo with viewers, that has the fantasy of the kinder transport and the matching and the rescue that took place so many years ago, at a time that many lives were saved, but there were also, this is a euphemism, people who fell through the cracks. And the reality is now, when the professional experts outline all the different kinds of risks and dangers that may arise if the matching process is not undertaken in a efficient, quick, but sensible and robust way, it does give pause for thought. So I don't think there is any other substitute certainly for no substitute for organizations like World Jewish Relief, but to take its time, to be careful, to go through and do matching, and has to rely on the government to do the bits around the safeguarding, and for the local authorities to take the responsibility which they are set up to do. And then for individuals, communities, and organizations like World Jewish Relief to add to and support that core process.
Maurice, thank you. Rachel, you had your hand up, and before I ask you to add something to that, Jonathan in the chat says it would be useful if Rachel could talk more about her experience of the community sponsorship scheme, which will be the medium to long-term solution for those refugees who stayed post 6 months, and what's required under the scheme. How might that be a more light touch for one set up for the Ukrainians? And this is a very important question we haven't really touched on tonight. What's going to be the effect of the Ukrainian scheme for all those Afghan refugees still stuck in hotels who should not be forgotten? Rachel.
Thank you. And if it's the Jonathan Levy I'm thinking, I think we're fellow community sponsors. Can I quickly say about matching? There is a website which is comes from a government-funded organisation which has been was set up to support community sponsorship, and they're called Reset, RESET, Reset UK, and they have a matching site, and they are brilliant, and we all know and trust them. And I just wanted to echo Daniel, absolutely. I think that's what we're shouting from the rooftops. Don't try and do this on your own. And to that end, to come to Jonathan's question, just real briefly, the community sponsorship scheme that was set up 2016, which we work with at Herne Hill Welcomes Refugees, and over 100 groups around the country are doing this, requires a group to, we do all the bit before the family arrives, as well as the support once the family has arrived. So a very, very rigorous application process, evidence of safeguarding training, £9,000 money needs to be raised per family. Evidence of where we will provide or outsource English language provision, which schools we have in mind to get the children into, how, and almost then a timetable of how in the first days and then weeks and then months the befrienders will support, and then at the same time be aware that that support is a kind of, there's a tension, you're supporting and you're enabling the family to live without you, because the whole point is that after a year, ideally the family is standing on their own feet. That's foggy, and of course good relationships can last beyond that, but in terms of the formal support, it is a year. And as I said earlier, the family is housed for 2 years minimum, and the responsibility of the group there is to find a property. So the families do not live with us. That's one of the key differences to the community sponsorship scheme as we know it, and the Ukrainian scheme, the new one. We find property which someone might own a second house, they rent it out, but they're willing then to rent out their property at housing benefit rates. So we're always on the hunt for benevolent landlords. Any of you out there, it's an extraordinary thing that a person can do to enable a refugee family to live independently of us. So where I think my time is running out, but Jonathan, in terms of what we can provide, and I think it just goes back to what Daniel said, we have the expertise in what it takes when a family arrives, because it is actually a very intense time. And Sarah, I hear everything you said, and you're right. And it's also really hard. It's glorious and it's really difficult. So don't take it on alone. And there are ways that we can connect you with groups of volunteers like ours who would love to support.
So Sarah, just before I ask you to comment on that, I know that there are some people watching tonight, several people, who are thinking about taking in a family, but they may be uncertain because they have concerns. Can we trust people with our belongings in the house? What happens in dynamics if there are other members of the family there? I'd like to ask each of the panelists how you would answer the question. Somebody says, I'd like to, but I'm not sure. Sarah.
I will answer that, but also on the
Please.
Afghans, which was specifically asked by Jonathan just now. I mean, they've been really badly let down, and I suspect that this scheme is in part because the government is desperate not to have another Afghan debacle. They're still in the hotels. We've been talking to the Home Office since October, September, about trying to get them into hosting, completely unsuccessfully. And now we're told the mental illnesses, the distress is so much, institutionalized is so much, they're not suitable for hosting. I mean, I don't know. It has been a really grim thing. And now people are being sent from one hotel in one part of the country to another hotel in other parts of the country. Hardly anybody's in their own front door housing. It has been really tough. And I think one ought to remember also all those other nationalities who are going through the asylum process, not being treated, I don't know, because they're not Europeans, and not being treated in the same way. They also are having it very tough. So that's important. Going back onto the hosting thing and how you deal with it, you think about it beforehand. You have to have the whole household at the very least on side. It's really good if you've got your neighbours and your community, people around you, places you pray and play on side as well. And then I think limit your expectations. If you're hosting with something like us, or possibly with World Jewish Relief, if after 3 or 4 months it is really not working, we find other people to host, assuming it's not safeguarding or anything. And the other point I think is theft. No, I mean, 200,000 nights. We've had one disputed alarm clock and one stolen card. You could host an awful lot of other people and not have anything as little as that. Everyone gets keys. It's never been a problem. That's one of the things I wouldn't worry about. Your safety and that side, don't worry about it. Arguing about who's eaten the last banana? Yeah, argue about that instead.
Sarah, thank you. Daniel, what would you say to somebody who's thinking of doing it but a bit hesitant about it?
Sure. I mean, I think when asking the question, is it going to be hard? The answer is yes, it is going to be hard, and it's something not to jump into lightly. But all the best things and all the most worthwhile things usually are hard. And this is not a good situation. This is a terrible situation. And actually, this is a time where we really can stand up as a country and within our communities and say, you know what, we will do something, even though it might be uncomfortable and it might be difficult. But I'll just go back to the comments I made previously. Get a community around you. Get people who can support you whilst you're supporting them. And remember that these people, whilst what we're seeing on the news and what they're going through, they are refugees. They are so much more than refugees. These are people with hobbies and interests and children who want to go to school and things that they want to do. And so actually really seeing people as people and looking for that holistic support for them will help them, and in turn will help you as well.
Maurice, what do you say to somebody who's thinking about it? But can I also just introduce this? We've had another comment from Julian, who says he's only just logged on, but his concern is that 6 months is a long time if the people taking in, living with a family, don't work out well. Is there any way the period can be more flexible, please? So 2 parts to the question. What would you say to somebody who's hesitant about it?
Well, just on the first point, I mean, the government scheme is very clear that the scheme is for 6 months. I defer to Sarah about the Sarah. Sarah, I defer to Sarah about the her experience of very practical flexibility, and I found her opening very inspiring about the practical experience of having a refugee at home. That's not something I've ever done, and not something it's pretending I've ever done. So I can't share that same experience. What I would say, stepping back from it, is that right now, it is, I understand that 150,000 people or so have registered on the government website. Not all of those will be suitable, but it seems extremely unlikely indeed that the offers will be exceeded by the number of refugees. I can't be sure about that, but that seems extremely likely. And therefore, I think that what I would remind everybody, as well as making their genuine and well thought through offer, is that there are other ways to help. And the most effective way to help, in addition to this offer, is to translate your willingness into cash and persuade others to give cash to organizations that are delivering rescue, relief into Ukraine itself.
Thank you. Rachel.
I think if you're hesitant, that's absolutely right and fair, because as everyone has said, it needs real reflection. And I echo what Sarah said. If there are more than if there's a household thinking about it, it needs to be a household meeting needs to take place to get agreement. And yes, do it. And if you really can't do it, also place the right value on what you might be doing. If you say to your neighbor up the road who's hosting a Ukrainian, how about we'd love to take them out on Saturday afternoon. We'd love to have the kids around for tea. We'd love to take you to the cinema, just so that is so valuable as well. So if that's what you can do, then do that as well. And I think just on this, the burden and the joyful responsibility, because it is both and for hosts, is one of the things that citizens are looking for as well, in order to support all of the additional work that goes around the hosting, is for larger institutions. It might be a Citizens UK Alliance, it might be a diocese, it might be a group of synagogues or faith groups, it could be a university, but a larger institution who say, look, do you know what, we can welcome 50 people at a time. And if they can find 20 of those people to welcome 50 refugees, they want this campaign to happen by Easter, so there'll be 1,000 by Easter. In so doing, it's so much, not simpler, but it's more straightforward to put in place safeguarding, voluntary support, and a much more robust system around those 50. So again, people, it's the same story, so that people are not doing it alone. So if any of you are from larger institutions who think we could probably, among our members, welcome 50, then immediately you've got a community in place to support those people. So if you can't host, there is so much more you can do as well.
Rachel, I'm very pleased. Sarah, I'll come to you in a moment. I'm very pleased that you've said what you've just done. It built on what Maurice had said, because the purpose of this evening was not only to provide advice and information for people who are willing to provide a home, but if you're not able to provide a home, or don't feel that you can provide a home, or don't have a home to provide, how else can you support? And you've said that it's really important that if you know people in your community who are having someone in their home, there are all sorts of things you can do to help them, and more importantly, through them, to help the refugee who's with them. But Daniel, I'll come to you in a moment. But I just want to pick up on something that Maurice said and have your views. Lots and lots of people want to do something. And a lot of people have gone out collecting clothes and connecting food and connecting I don't know what else, and taking it to a point, and they think it's going to make its way over to Ukraine. And they're obviously, they want to do this because they want to help. But Maurice, you've said, I'll come to you first, you've said if you can't provide a home and support in some other way for someone who has a home, why money rather than goods? What's the problem?
So the most efficient way to help people is to put the resources in their hands. This is a broader humanitarian issue. It applies to an emergency issue. It applies very much to Ukraine, but it applies to many international humanitarian issues. If you imagine the situation, for example, on the border now with Ukraine, you have many people trying to flee. You have goods and supplies trying to get in. You have the military and the lethal force, which is needed, which is trying to be got in. You have journalists. You have all sorts of people trying to help, and it's absolutely chaotic situation. So if you've only got X amount of space on the road, imagine funding a big lorry that's well packed with all the goods that are needed in the right sizes, taking the same space and the same time, compared to lots of little vans with different sizes of shoes and different bits and pieces. It blocks it all up. So the Red Cross made a very powerful tweet. They said, the International Committee of the Red Cross, they said most goods in gifts in kind don't make a positive impact. Some actually do harm. So I just think it's our responsibility to think about that when we make choices about how we generate impact that really counts.
Thank you. Sarah and then Daniel.
I'd endorse that. Honestly, it does seem that collecting clothes, they always seem to include bikinis and ball gowns. It's really not a good idea. But I just want to go back to what Rachel was saying about communities getting together. And we are seeing at Refugees at Home a number of kind of almost joint applications from specific towns, Hebden Bridge, Olney, Malvern, smaller towns where actually you might not think refugees would want to be, because mostly they want to be in cities because of the communications. But if you could host 15, 20, 25 families in a smallish town, in a community, I think that could be a real advance. It's like the institutions that Rachel would like to see done, but in the broader community. And that could really work, and it could make a difference, because everybody would feel they had people around them who spoke the language, who ate the same food, who wanted to be together, and that could really help. And in answer to the person who wants to know about sharing of kitchens, it's fine, you take turns.
Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to echo what Maurice has just said in terms of donations in kind and gifts in kind that are going out to Poland and are going out to Ukraine. I would just really encourage people who are watching this at the moment to look at the websites of anybody who's on this call, or go to the website of the Joint Refugee Action Network, where you'll find a lot of organisations who are working on the ground or in the UK and have a really good idea of what's going on. Maurice said it perfectly. He said the goods that are needed, and it's so important just to make sure that what we're giving we know is needed and we know is relevant to the situation. But I think more broadly, what's coming up a huge amount this evening is that word community. And I think a few times we've seen in the comment section people saying that they're not sure about hosting, or what can they do if they're not in a position to host. Just look at what is your space within the community. Maybe it is that you could sponsor a community space. For all of its many faults with the Afghan scheme, I was speaking with an organisation just last week who was saying actually the one positive of that is that because people are in one place, they often have a community space. There might be a hotel lobby, and that's really looking for a silver lining, but there is a space where people can gather. And actually within this current scheme, it might be that people feel quite isolated because they're often different houses. And so maybe you could sponsor an afternoon in a cafe, or in your community centre, or your church, or your synagogue. If you work in a school, as somebody in the comment section said they did, maybe you could open your school up and run something for the families for an afternoon a week, whatever it might be. Maybe you could take people out and show them the local park or the local museum, whatever it is. Look at what's your space in the community and how do you open that up to people.
Dan, you I think referred to somebody in the comments section before who said that they were a Russian speaker and thought that that might be of assistance to an organization. I think that's a very good point. And there wasn't a name, just the site from which the person was speaking, but I would imagine that any one of the organizations here tonight would welcome input from a Russian-speaking person who can help them in any of the areas that we've spoken about. So let's just, and it's West Bank Productions, it's just come up. Please contact one of the organizations directly, and I'm sure that they will find something for you to do. And again, picking up on Daniel's point, making a local school available for one afternoon for people to come together is a very good way of engendering a community spirit and helping to welcome those who come here as refugees. Does anyone want to say anything more about the effect that this scheme is having or could have or will have on Afghan refugees or other refugees who are now in one sense left in limbo? Rachel, I can see you nodding.
Nodding profusely. Well, I don't know. I don't know about anyone else, but I've had to really take myself off to a quiet corner at home and spend a few minutes thinking about my response to this particular crisis, and then just interrogate my response to previous crises. Yes, I co-founded a community sponsorship group, so we have resettled an Iraqi family, we have resettled a Syrian family, but and I think that experience helps you to look quite objectively at the national response to this, and I think it is right that we ask ourselves questions about this welcome versus other welcomes. However, my great hope, and I'm going to say I believe this, is that this moment that we are in could be a tipping point in terms of the narrative within the UK, this hostile environment that we want to eradicate as an idea. We can see that the British public are hugely keen on saying, yes, come, regardless of what's going on with nationality and borders bills and other attitudes. There is a posture of the country which is towards saying welcome. So my hope is that if we do seize this moment, and if we do stand up and act, and that might be offering someone a cup of tea in the afternoon, that might be your role. But if we do that, I feel that we have then, through these communities coming together, we've got enough power to then show the government that these schemes need to be broader, that the Afghans in the hotels shouldn't be there any longer, and that other people coming into the country need to be welcomed in the same way. If we can put the infrastructure in place and put the pressure on our local authorities and government, I think, and as I say, I'm going to choose to believe that it could change the narrative for the longer term.
Rachel, thank you. And any other thoughts from another panelist on how this might affect Afghan or other groups of refugees? Sarah?
Well, it is ironic, isn't it, that this is all happening just as the really quite regressive Immigration and Borders Bill has now hit the House of Commons, which has overturned, I mean, so far, I think all of the 18 amendments that the Lords put in that made it marginally more humane. I mean, if a Ukrainian arrives by little boat because they couldn't get a visa, are they going to be dumped in some other part of the world? Are they going to be given a different sort of refugee status? Are they going to be not allowed to have family reunification? That's what the implications of this bill are. And while I would love to feel Rachel's optimism, there's going to be a huge amount of climbing back out of this bill, which, you know, breaches the Refugee Convention, is not compliant with European human rights bills. It's a very daunting time. The Afghans are having a pretty bad time of it, and they were people we worked with. The Syrians, you know, a little while ago, everyone was in favor of hosting Syrians, and that was great. They're having a rotten time, and this bill is going to make it very, very much worse.
Thank you. Daniel?
I think that the two people previous to me, Rachel and Sarah, have articulated what I was thinking far better than I could. But I think that I think that we can feel very, very proud of the outpouring and the response of people, the fact that so many people have come forward and said we want to help. And I very much hope that is reflected and in future policy, and that does grow to include other nationalities as well, regardless of what's going through the Commons and the Lords at the moment. I think that the people have very much torpedoed the idea of a hostile environment, and what people really feel is that they do want to be a welcoming nation. And I don't think that is limited to Ukrainians. And I agree with Rachel. I think that there needs to be difficult conversations had where we look at this and say, why is the response different?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to wind up the evening now and give each of our panelists a chance for a final word. And I'm going to start, Maurice, with you, please.
Well, I just echo my thanks to you, Henry, to the Chief Rabbi, to Justin Cohen, the indefatigable Justin Cohen, and the Jewish News for putting this on. I've learned a great deal from listening to my fellow panelists, Rachel, Sarah, and you, Daniel. And I think that I would encourage everybody to continue to keep informed. There's some frequently answered questions. We will try to keep up to date on the World Jewish Relief website. And thank you very much for organizing this.
Sarah?
Well, yes, thanks for inviting us. It's great to participate. It's always good to think about the issues around what you're doing and hear from other people too. We are hoping that we're going to play a full part in making hosting successful, making it widespread, making it normal, and making it so it's life enhancing for everybody, not just the people coming in. We can all build communities, and it's a very good way of doing so. Thank you for your assistance in helping us do that.
Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting Citizens UK, inviting me to be a part of this, and thank you to all the other panelists and Chief Rabbi. It has been it's been a treat to be a part of. And so the link that you can see now is to a form that Citizens UK have designed, and you can just say whether or not you want to host. If you can't host, what you can offer. If you are part of a community sponsorship group already and you want to mentor other volunteers or mentor a host, then that's also an opportunity. And if you're thinking about it, do contact Citizens and say, is there a community sponsorship group in my neighbourhood? Because there might be a group of volunteers there who are ready to support you.
And Daniel?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this panel. It has been a real pleasure to be with you and to hear about so many of the inspiring initiatives that are happening in the midst of a really terrible situation. The sector is very creative and is very compassionate and really wants to make this work, as do many of the tens of thousands of people who have offered to host and offered to be involved in bringing community. I just encourage you to go to that link at the bottom of the page, jran.uk, because we want to continue building community. We want to continue collaboration and communication. So we'll be hosting an event for organizations in the sector to make sure that we're joined up in our support and actually just to think creatively about solutions to a lot of these issues. But thank you so much for having me on.
So let me, on behalf of everyone watching tonight, thank each of you four panelists for your contributions and for your final words. I think we probably have all learned something from each other. And if we can take that forward for the better end of trying to do more to ensure that refugees who come to this country, we're talking mainly about Ukrainian refugees, but let's hope that we can build on the atmosphere that has become very apparent in this country of wanting to do more for people in need, for actually accepting what being a refugee means, and instead of making it ever more difficult for them to come here, making it easier if they want to come here. We should be proud that they want to come here rather than wanting to turn them away. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank those watching for their very positive comments and questions. And let me also thank the Chief Rabbi for his inspiring remarks at the beginning, for Justin Cohen and Jewish News for making this event happen. You do wonderful work. And I can't end the evening without thanking our tech team led by Leo Mendel this evening for making this happen. Astonishing how even only a few years ago, an evening like this just would not have been possible. And now we do it. Thank you all very much for being here, and let's hope that, please God, peace will come soon in Ukraine. Thank you and good night.